Welcome back to the Tableau Metadata API series. I'm Josh and this is the intermediate tutorial. So if you haven't watched the beginner tutorial yet, I'd highly recommend starting there. We covered the basics of GraphQL syntax and some simple queries, and the link is in the description below. So today we're going to take things to another level. We're going to explore GraphQL variables, data lineage tracking, and field level analysis. So these are some of the techniques that I think you'll find to be very helpful, especially if you're looking to automate or trace lineage. All code examples are available in the GitHub repository, which now includes both beginner and intermediate tutorials. So before I get started, I do want to mention that this is inspired by the data dev team at Tableau, specifically the data dev quest challenge. And so I would highly encourage you, if you're looking to get into the data dev space, these exercises are extremely helpful. This one in particular was put together by Jordan Woods, so I want to specifically thank him for his contributions here. And hopefully this tutorial will help those of you who are new to this space or just want to explore the data dev community. You can go to datadevquest.com. And if you're inspired to learn more about the data dev community, you can go to Tableau website. That is at tableau.com/community/data dev. And I'll put that in the notes below as well. And as I mentioned, all of this is on GitHub. You'll find references to the beginner. And today we're going to look at the intermediate tutorial. But again, in here you have examples. The examples that we're going to walk through today, I've left the code in there as well as expected solutions. And those of you that want to take it to an extra level, we've also provided some extension opportunities as well. All right, so let's jump back in. You're going to want to navigate to your Tableau server environment. And just like we did last time, make sure that you click on the External Assets tab. Look for the Query Metadata link in the upper right-hand corner. We're going to go ahead and explore GraphQL once again. And just a refresher, on the left, this is your query pane. The right is your results. And down here at the bottom, we're going to explore this today. We're going to include some variables in our queries. All right, so in the beginner tutorial, we learned how to query workbooks and filter for specific content. But we hard-coded values like workbook names directly in our queries. And today we're going to make our queries much more powerful. We're going to make them reusable using variables. So we're going to shift our focus from workbooks to data sources and just understanding the relationships between them. You know, unlike last time, we'll say, well, will this break if I modify the data source? Is this specific field being used throughout my environment? And we'll be able to answer questions like those today. So this first query is going to show us which workbooks depend on each data source in our environment. So I'm going to go ahead, just like last time, we're going to query our data, and I'm looking for our data sources this time rather than workbooks. So let's go ahead and put get data source, just give it a name, keep things clean. And I'm going to ask for, instead of workbooks like last time, I want to see what the data sources are. So we're going to look for data sources. The information we're going to ask for, we'll ask for the ID, the name of the data source, and the owner. Now, within the owners, we're going to ask who those owners are. So underneath owner, we can nest our query. And I'll go ahead and use username. All right, let's start with understanding data source dependencies. So this first query is going to show us which workbooks depend on each data source in our environment. So just like last time, we're going to submit a query and we're going to look for our data sources. So I'm just going to go ahead and give it a name, get data source. And unlike last time, we looked for workbooks. This time I'm going to look specifically at data sources. So I'm going to include that here. And within each data source, we're going to ask for its ID, Now for each data source, we're going to be asking for its downstream workbooks. So I'm going to go ahead and include that here. And for each downstream workbook, we're going to ask for the ID, its name, its owner, but I don't want just the owner. I want the owner's username as well. So notice we use downstream workbooks. These are the workbooks that use this particular data source. And we're going to get the owner information so that we know who to reach out to if changes are needed. So this is pretty powerful because you can modify or republish a data source and run this query to see exactly which workbooks are going to be affected and who owns them before you make those changes. So let's see what we get. All right, here's a list of our data sources. So as you can see, we get a complete map of dependencies. Each data source shows all the workbooks that depend on it, along with their ownership information. And if I want to include more information, for example, its name, you can refine your query. Now I've got not only the data source ID, I've got its name, any workbooks that might be affected, and so on. Pretty powerful stuff. All right, now let's go ahead and introduce variables. I think you'll find this to be pretty powerful. So a key concept that makes GraphQL queries powerful is basically instead of hard coding values, like I said, we can make our queries dynamic and we can reuse them. Rather than having to type a separate query every single time, we can just introduce variables and adjust that variable based on our needs. All right, so this time, let's go ahead and query. I'm going to specify this time which data source, but instead of hard coding, we're going to introduce a variable so that we can change the data source. We can run multiple requests without having to write the query every single time. So let's go ahead and again, we're going to look in our data sources, but this time I'm going to filter them by name. And instead of putting the name hard-coded, we're just going to go ahead and introduce our variable once again, data source name. And then specify what information we want. So, I forgot my brackets here. All right, so let's go ahead and ask again for the name, the ID, data source name, and then this time we're going to ask for the fields as well in the data source. So let's ask for the field ID, its name, maybe a description. I think that's good. So a couple things to notice here. First, we're defining the variable. We're calling it data source name. The query is going to basically explore the structure and any data source that we specify. So we're going to get data source information plus all of its fields with descriptions. Now this is where things get interesting. If you go down to the query variables pane, again, this is in JSON. So I'm going to define the variable. And in this case, we chose the variable to be data source name. Notice that's what pulls up right away. Now we can specify what data source name we're looking for. So I'm going to look for a data source with the name company expenses. All right, so assuming that one of these data sources is described as company expenses, we should get results. So right away, when I run this, it basically substitutes our variable value, in this case, company expenses, and it shows all the fields in company expenses data source. So the beauty of this approach is basically I can change the variable value to explore any data source without having to rewrite the entire query. All right, so this time I'm going to go ahead and substitute a different data source name. We'll go ahead and call it Sample Superstore. So assuming this data source exists in our server, we should end up with the results. So again, different data source. Notice for this data source, Sample Superstore, we've got all of the fields that are represented. We've got their names, their IDs, and if there is a description, looks like most of these are without description. All right, so pretty powerful stuff. For our third example, we're going to take this even further. So we're going to try and track individual fields across your entire environment. So for example, if you had a field that was being used and you wanted to see exactly which workbooks were using this, if you needed to make a change to this field, you want to know how many workbooks are going to be affected. We're going to be able to find the field, identify which data source contains it. It may be in multiple data sources, and then which workbooks actually use that data source. So let's go ahead and again, we're gonna perform a query, and I'm gonna go ahead and just call it field lineage. We're gonna be looking to see where this field exists throughout our environment. So again, I'm gonna give it a variable name and specify what type of variable it is, data type. So what type of query? We're gonna look at fields, and for each field, now, if I left it alone, this would pull up all of the fields in the given workbook, but we're looking for a specific field. So I'm going to specify using a filter, and specifically, I wanted to look for the field in my variable. So if I want to change the field that I'm looking for, all I have to do again is change the variable represented by field name, and I can get an entirely new set of results. So now let's specify what we want. So for each field, I'm going to ask for the ID. Let's go ahead and ask for the name, and I want to see what data source or data sources that this field exists in. And for that data source, tell me the ID. What's the name of the data source? And then those workbooks that are downstream, which workbooks would be affected? And I don't want to know just what workbooks. I want to be able to identify them by name. And tell me the owner, so that if these are affected, I know who to reach out to. So we'll ask specifically for, how about username? So again, this query searches for the fields with a specific name, then it follows a complete lineage chain. We're going to find the field, identify the data source that contains it, and then see which workbooks use that data source. Down here, you'll notice in the variables, this was left over from our previous example. We're not looking for a data source like last time, we're looking for a field name. So let's go ahead and change our variable. Notice it auto-populates there as soon as I start to type it. Field name, and in this case, if I left this alone, this would be looking for field names with the name Sample Superstore. I don't expect to find anything. I don't think any of my fields would have been called Sample Superstore. So let's see. Yep, notice we get empty results. No fields, empty set. All right, so let's pick a field that I know is a common one that's being used in probably most folks' data sets. Let's go ahead and choose date. Now you want to be careful. These are case specific. All right, so the field name date. We can see here that it's in the data source company expenses. What are the downstream workbooks? We can see here that it's being used in the workbook expenses with spark lines. We can see the owner here. If I wanted to choose a different name, let's say I picked range. Not sure if that's out there, but if I wanted to check, oh, notice we don't have range being used in any of our data sources. All right, let's look up another common one. How about category? We can see here that category is in multiple data sources as well as multiple workbooks. We've got all the information here. Again, here's a good example. Category being used by this data source and the name of the workbook affected followed. Yeah. So you can see pretty powerful stuff. A couple key points that variables make your queries reusable. So you can save a query and just change the variable values instead of rewriting the whole thing. Second, you could actually use multiple variables in a single query. Now, we didn't do that here, but you could specify different data types. So we focused on string, but you could include integers, booleans, and other types. So I encourage you to explore. Again, all of the information you can find that we did today in GitHub, specifically the intermediate. I've got the instructions, everything that we did today, sample code so that you can try on your own. So thanks for watching. Feel free to add any comments below. Hope you found this to be helpful. Till next time.